All right, everyone, welcome everyone to today. We're not just talking about hiring, we're reshaping how we see people. So, this training is a space to unpack unconscious habits and rebuild a more inclusive, equitable approach to hiring. Our aim is to empower you to lead with integrity, fairness, and humanity. And with that being said, welcome to today's session on bias and sensitivity training for interview panels, where we're going to be talking about creating a more inclusive and unbiased hiring practices. I'm honored to be here with Dr. Hall. Together, we bring years of experience rooted in service, leadership, and transformation. This is a conversation that we're having together between professionals, but more importantly, it's a dialogue between people striving to do better. Dr. Hall, please introduce yourself.
All right. Peace and blessings, everyone. Dr. Marcellus Hall, VP and Director of Education and Training. Very, very happy to be here in this space and look forward to what we create and learn today.
Sorry, I was also Jawan Smart, founder and managing member of Montoup Lemons. I'm just a little happy. Dr. Hall's in the next room, so he's in town. So that's a beautiful thing for us. Now, with that being said, these goals are the foundation of our time together that I'm about to lay out for you. And identify and reduce the bias isn't just about compliance. It's about building a culture where every candidate has a fair shot. That means understanding EDIA, evaluating equitably, and staying accountable. With that said, the first thing that we're going to do is identify and mitigate biases in hiring. We want you to understand EDIA in recruitment. We also want you to apply fair evaluation techniques. And lastly, if my slides will work here, we want you to foster accountability in hiring panels. Now, we always like to start our unconscious bias training with this quote because it resonates very near and dear to what it is, as well as for me and hopefully all of you that are here today. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny, by Lao Tzu. Now, I love this quote. It reminds me that everything we do starts with a thought. Our biases, conscious or not, shape what we say, how we assess, and who we hire. So with that being said, let's begin by looking inward. First thing I want everyone to do is we're going to have a connection by understanding each other. So let's ground ourselves in real experiences. I want you to think of a time you witnessed or experienced unfairness in hiring. No names, just truth. Sharing helps us connect and reflect. So let's reflect again, in the chat, I want you to put or share a time you saw or experienced an unfair hiring practice. It can be anonymous, but again, no names, just truth. Open my chat. Now, I'll start off and I'll just share with you an example of when I witnessed unfair practices. One of my jobs, we were looking for a person to come on and help with the sales department. And we ran through so many candidates. And my account executive at the time didn't give me a clear indication of what they were looking for or why these people weren't qualified. I tried to evaluate as fairly as possible, but it was just more so of, I don't think they're a good fit, or I don't know. So in itself, it showed some bias. It might have been implicit or explicit, which we'll discuss in more detail. But with that being said, it was not a fair hiring practice because there was no specific structured interviews or criteria that we were meeting. It was just based on how they felt about the candidate at the time, which is unfair to the candidates as well as to themselves and to the organization, because we didn't allow anybody to come in that could have helped us dearly at that time. All right, I'm seeing some things in the chat that says if you have a referral, you will be chosen over the rest because it because the referral not what you know, or it's not based on what you know or your abilities. That is the absolute possibility there for sure. Pay discrepancy for women when worked at a law firm. Yeah, that's a very reoccurring theme, unfortunately. Senior leader came to interviewers and stated he favored a certain person applying for a position. That shows a very big affinity bias in that regard, something that we'll get into. I was told that I was hired because I was the only woman that applied. Wow, that's not what DEI or EDI is about. But I'm glad you recognize that, and I'm sure that you're making the best out of your abilities and your position. And hopefully you don't have any kind of imposter syndrome because of that, which is often attributed when people get hired and they say, well, you only hired me for this particular reason. So that's something that we have to mitigate as well. I'll read a couple more, then I'll go on. And I love the interaction in the chat. I appreciate it so much. As a hiring manager in the private sector, I had to deal with managers who would use the not a good fit when it was obvious they didn't like the candidate that didn't look like them. Wow. Yeah. We're going to talk about all this. I love all this. Keep it rolling. One more, and then we will keep pressing. I was excluded from a position applied for because my degree was in business admin, not public admin. I had been working in the field for several years already and denied an interview because of my degree. Yeah, that you get the overqualified or you get the not degrees, or and that's where we have to look at a candidate for their qualifications and experience as opposed to just those particular measurements that oftentimes are looked at as to be a qualified candidate. Doesn't mean that they're not qualified based on the degree that they held. But thank y'all for all of that. Thank y'all. That was great. Now, when we're talking about bias, we have to understand it better. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Whether conscious or unconscious, it can shape outcomes in ways we don't see all the time. Recognizing it is the first step in dismantling. So let's recognize what these biases are and keep pressing forward. Now, with that being said, let's take a moment to distinguish between conscious and unconscious bias, two concepts that play a powerful role in our decisions, especially in hiring. This slide will help us name the difference. Conscious bias is intentional. Unconscious bias happens without us realizing, but both have very real impacts. Our job is to interrupt both. Now, the definition of conscious bias, which we also call explicit bias, refers to attitudes and beliefs we are aware of. Again, the ones that we are aware of. These are intentional thoughts, actions, or preferences. So an example of that might be openly preferring candidates from specific schools or assuming someone is too old or too young for a role. Now, conversely, the definition of unconscious bias, which we also call implicit bias, operates without our awareness. It shapes our background. It's shaped by our background, our cultural context, our lived experiences, the media we intake, our peer groups, all those things. Now, for example, here, you might instinctively assume someone is more competent because they remind you of yourself or someone you admire without realizing it. Same example we just talked about earlier when I asked about a time you witnessed an unfair hiring practice. Now, with all that said, let's look at some of the data and science behind it. Considering that an estimated 16% of our brain is active at one time, which translates to 16 billion of the 100 billion nerve cells in our brain being fired at any one given moment. We have more brain cells than we do stars in the Milky Way, as above, so below, right? And so with this phenomenal amount of stimulation that we receive, we are aware of only a fraction of everything going on around us. Yet all that unnoticed activity is registered in our subconscious, even though we are unaware of it. In other words, the 99% of things we don't notice have many times more influence on us than the less than 1% that we do notice. So what we have to do is be cognizant and conscious of our actions, our thoughts. Again, going back to Lao Tzu, watch our thoughts, they become your words, words become your actions, et cetera, et cetera. Because if we don't, then we can play into our own biases, which ultimately affects ourselves, the people that we're supporting, and our organization or the department in this case as a whole. With also look at some of the key differences that we talked about. When we look at intentional and known, we know that our biases, when it comes to unconscious bias or explicit bias, is based on our personal beliefs or stereotypes, and it can lead to discriminatory actions. An example here is, I don't think women can handle leadership roles. Calling cap. That's not true. We all know that. I hope we all know that. If we don't, I'm letting you know that's not true. And then unconscious bias, on the other hand, which we also call implicit bias, it's rooted, it's unintentional, and it's automatic. It's rooted in social conditioning and experiences, and it influences decisions without awareness. An example is assuming a younger candidate is more tech savvy than an older one. I worked in the IT field for many years, and I gleaned a lot of knowledge, most of my knowledge for those that were older and more experienced in those particular things, as converse to the ones that weren't. So that's not a thing either. But both types of bias affect hiring and can lead to unfair evaluations of candidates. That's the takeaway from this all. Now, when it comes to unconscious bias and in talent, or relation to talent acquisitions, we have to look at the different kind of biases that play a part here. Now, each of these biases has the power to tilt the scale, but our role in the panel is to neutralize that tilt, to pause, to ask ourselves why we're leaning one way and get back to objectivity. I'll list out the biases and give you an example, and then we'll keep pressing forward. So when it comes to affinity bias, it is favoring a candidate who shares similar backgrounds, interests, or characteristics as the panelist. An example of this would be a panelist feels an immediate connection with the candidate who attended the same university and gives them higher scores despite weaker qualifications compared to others. Next, we have confirmation bias, which is interpreting a candidate's response in a way that confirms pre-existing beliefs or stereotypes. So an example of this would be a panelist assumes older candidates struggle with technology and interprets a candidate's thoughtful pause before answering a tech question as confirmation of this belief. For me, I'm the type of person, a couple of things I'm good at. I can think and I can be patient. And a lot of times I let those things process because I try to perceive all different angles and possibilities, even though that's probably not possible. I try to perceive it, therefore I can give a thoughtful answer. And those candidates may be doing the same thing. But if you're confirming that they're not as qualified because they're giving that pause, that's just confirming what your pre-existing notions or beliefs are. Next, we have the halo effect. And the definition of that is by letting positive attribute overshadow other qualifications. The example here would be a candidate worked at a prestigious company and a panelist assumes they must be competent in all areas, even though their answers lack depth and key job competencies. Think about that for a second. You're letting one positive thing overshadow the rest because they have the answer or they're very proficient in this area, but you're letting it overshadow everything else. That's the halo effect. Now, the horns effect is allowing one negative attribute to disproportionately impact the overall evaluation. So it's the opposite of the halo effect. That's an example of that is a candidate is visibly nervous during the interview introduction, leading the panelists to dismiss their otherwise strong responses as lacking in confidence. So you are automatically going off the first impression saying, oh, this person is nervous and they aren't confident in their answers, which could be far from the truth. Next, we have gender bias. That's assuming one gender is better suited for a particular role. An example here is a panelist unconsciously believes men are better leaders and ranks a woman applying for a leadership role lower despite her superior qualifications. All too well, we see that through pay inequities, through imbalance in leadership roles, and et cetera, right? Next, we have cultural bias. That's the definition of this is preferring candidates whose cultural background aligns with the panelist's own norms. So an example is a panelist feels a candidate who speaks with a non-local accent wouldn't fit the team culture, despite the candidate having all required skills and experiences. You take somebody from the South who might have a little Southern twang on it, and then they say, nah, I can't rock with this. I can't vibe with this. Maybe it's because your own biases against people from the South, or you maybe had a bad experience in your lifetime. You feel like they may be inept or inadequate to fill that particular position. Regardless, it's a bias that is hurting that candidate's potential and opportunity, as well as potentially your organizations, and also defaming yourself internally by continuing to hold on to those biases. Next, we have age bias, which is favoring or discriminating against individuals based on age. An example here is a younger candidate is assumed to be more innovative and adaptable, while an older candidate is seen as too experienced or close to retirement, regardless of their performance. I've seen this so many times. I use my mother as an example. She has 10,000 degrees and was in accounting and owned her own business, but yet she's kept getting overlooked because they say you're overqualified, you're too experienced. We need somebody different. Now, that could have been a combination of age bias. That could have been a combination of gender bias. Who knows? It could have been a combination of multiple things. However, they missed out on the opportunity to hire someone that was extremely qualified and experienced in leading teams and everything else simply because of their own biases or discrimination. And then lastly, we have anchoring bias. This one is allowing the first piece of information to overly influence decisions. An example here is a candidate's impressive opening statement makes a strong impression, causing the panel to overlook later answers that are less aligned with a job criteria. Sound like a good salesman to me, right? but regardless, you're anchoring your belief that because they had such a strong opening statement or they had such a strong presence to begin with, the rest of their interview is overlooked because you're holding on to that one quality that they had. That's also a bias that we have to mitigate. Now that we've understood some of these different biases, and I'll refer to them during the course of this presentation or this session, we can get into why does it matter. Let's take a moment to reflect on the why of these biases, whether they're unconscious or conscious, and because they matter so deeply in the hiring process. Now, when we look at how it affects fairness and equity, it impacts those things adversely because bias distorts our ability to evaluate candidates fairly. It oftentimes leads to overlooking highly qualified individuals simply because they don't fit an unconscious idea. This compromises the integrity of our hiring process and goes against our values of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, or as we refer to it here as EDIA. Next, we have that it reduces workplace diversity and innovation. These are organizational consequences that we don't want to put into the ether, because it also creates a negative candidate experience. When we look at these two combined have organizational consequences because bias hiring contributes to homogeneity, groupthink, and the lack of innovation. So those diverse teams are proven to perform better, but only if they are actually hired. We have to hire them in order for us to get that innovation, to avoid that groupthink, and to move forward in our progress, both positively and productively. And when those qualified candidates from underrepresented groups are consistently passed over, it signals to others that they're not truly welcome. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. Next, we have it increases legal and compliance risks. And so when it comes to reputation and legal risks, these are patterns of biased decision-making that can cause or expose the organization to reputationally harm and even legal consequences related to discriminatory practices. Next, we have that it weakens employee retention and engagement. as well as it leads to poor hiring decisions and lower performance. We have moral and cultural responsibilities when it comes to this. It's not just about avoiding risk, just like, when it comes to increased legal and compliance risk, but it's about doing what's right. Everyone deserves an equal opportunity or equitable or fair opportunity to contribute their talents and be evaluated on their merits. Our decisions shape the culture we work in. When we challenge bias, we build a culture rooted in fairness, growth, and trust. These are things we have to keep in mind. Now, beyond ethics, there's data. Bias drains billions from organizations through disengagement, turnover, and lawsuits. Inclusion isn't just right, it's strategic. When we look at these stats, it tells the tale of just how much it costs from a financial standpoint. It costs economy 64 billion annually. 64 B's, not M's, but B's. That's a lot of money that you're costing the economy as a whole. So even if you take a fraction of that and apply it to the department or to an organization you worked for in the past, that's a lot of money being missed out on just because of bias. It decreases employment opportunity and economic stability. The EEOC, or Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, estimates that it collects $404 million from employers each year due to discriminatory practices. $404 million. That's a lot of money lost just for kind of hating on somebody. You know what I mean? Like, we gotta be better. And lastly, is disengaged employees can cost U.S. companies between 450 billion and 550 billion annually in lost productivity. So yeah, you get somebody hired in there, but now you're losing productivity just because there's bias evident and apparent within the organizational structure, and it's causing people to be disengaged, not want to show up for work, absenteeism, retention loss, all those things. It's a lot of money, again, just for hating on somebody. So let's control the hate, let's control the discrimination, be better, and make sure that we're following a good moral code and not only doing what's right for each other, but for ourselves as well. Now, we're going to get in a real world scenario. And after this, listen clearly, read clearly, however you want to do it. But I'm going to ask you after this to apply or give suggestions in the chat, what you think would be a fair mitigation tactic in order to prevent what you're about to hear. All right, so this is the scenario. A state healthcare and the policy department is hiring a senior public health policy advisor to oversee policy development and implementation. The hiring panel consists of 3 senior officials, all of whom have worked in the department for over 15 years and have advanced degrees from top-tier public health schools. During the interview process, they unconsciously give higher scores to candidates who attended prestigious universities and have similar career trajectories of their own. Meanwhile, a highly qualified candidate from a state university who has extensive experience working in underserved communities and a track record of successful policy implementation is rated lower due to their educational background and non-traditional career path. Despite demonstrating strong analytical and leadership skills, they are overlooked in favor of a candidate with a prestigious degree but less field experience. Now, in the chat, I would like to hear from you. What are some of the mitigation techniques that you would use or implementation techniques that you would use in order to prevent this in future scenarios or in this scenario in specific? Use a more diverse hiring panel. Absolutely, Jeannie. Switch up hiring panels. Anchor-based rating to structure interview questions. Great. That's great. First off, have a hiring panel with more diversity for them. That would definitely help as well. Having that diverse hiring panel gives that different perspective of how their track record applies and could be a great fit or great addition for this particular team or for this particular role as senior public health policy advisor. Make sure that all candidates receive the same structured questions. Great. That is, yes, indeed, Charlotte. Hey, how you doing, Charlotte? All right. I'm good. Thank you. Give more weight in scoring for areas such as experience. That's great, Laura. I like that a lot. That's great. Include some behavioral questions in the interview. Yes, that'd be great. Training like this for all hiring managers, for sure. Eliminate the school's name, which would be getting into covering PII and things of that nature, identifiable markers. Change the interview panel specifically by including team peers. Yeah, that's great. Change the interview panel specifically by exclude education as a primary decision driver. I like that. Getting into qualifications and experience now, skills and experience, should I say. All right. Great job, everyone. Let's look at some of the things Dr. Hall and I, what you say, Dr. Hall? You got the cheat code. Panelists can conduct a post-interview reflection that challenges the motives behind their decision-making. Oh, that's great, man. I like that. That's really great. So let's look at this. This real-world example showed us how even experienced professionals can fall into bias. So the prestige and pedigree don't always equal capability. Let's learn to value lived experience and impact. So one of the things we talked about, and that was discussed several times within the chat, is structured interviews. We use these standardized rubrics to evaluate candidates based on job-related skills. Skills is the key word here, such as policy analysis, stakeholder engagement, and impact assessment, rather than subjective preferences. When we base a candidate off their skills and experience and things of that nature, we fall in line of getting the best qualified individual for the job, not just their degree or where their degree came from, the prestige and the pedigree and all those things. Blind resume reviews. That's where I believe Monica, she was saying, take away the schools. But even statistics show that we have to remove things such as names, because people with more ethnic sounding names get called back less for different interviews and things of that nature. So removing the PII, names, schools, and other demographic details from initial application reviews to focus on experience and qualifications. Diverse hiring panels. Heard that a few times within the chat, which is spot on. Include panelists from different backgrounds, including professionals with non-traditional career paths to ensure fairer assessments. I think someone also said use people from the team that they're being hired from, or different team members. Great idea. Fantastic idea. Bias awareness training. Train hiring panelists on unconscious bias and how they can impact decision-making. Let's spend just a second on this, because one thing, when we have to look at the progression of our mindsets from recognition to awareness to acceptance, because recognition is about identifying something or someone previously known. Awareness is about understanding the existence or presence of something. And acceptance is about embracing something, often with empathy and understanding. So acceptance goes beyond our awareness and recognition by including a willingness to engage and support. Here, we're imploring you to stop for a second and be aware of your own biases and how they might surface during an interview, to understand that despite their intentions, they could do harm to evaluating candidates fairly. One of my favorite sayings is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. A lot of times we have good intentions behind things, but we don't necessarily understand how they're going to affect the person or people or group that we're intending to do good for. So again, here we have to be aware that our unconscious biases can play a part in that decision-making and actively mitigate them by looking inward and saying, okay, let me stop for a second and think, why do I think this way? Why do I feel this way about this particular answer or this candidate? And then by reflecting, we can then set a course correct in real time. All right, next we have practical assessments, introduce case studies or policy proposal exercises to evaluate candidates based on their ability to develop and analyze healthcare policies, kind of what we're doing right now with training that goes hand in hand with number 4, which was the bias awareness training. And then lastly, accountability measures. Conduct post-hiring audits to ensure fair and equitable hiring decisions and monitor diversity metrics over time. See, great answer, Dr. Hall. You was spot on, man. I wonder how you got that. All right, next, we're going to talk about some inclusive and tactful interviewing, which we'll start with equality versus equity. Now, this distinction is fundamental, not just in hiring, but how we design systems, policies, and interactions. We often hear the words equality and equity used interchangeably, but they represent very different approaches. Equality means giving someone or giving everyone the same thing, regardless of their individual circumstances. It assumes that everyone's at a level playing field, whereas equity is recognizing that a candidate comes from diverse backgrounds and ensuring fair treatment by providing tailored support to create a level playing field. So when we're doing this in hiring, equality might look like offering every candidate a 30-minute interview with the same questions and format without considering their specific needs, where equity might be offering them a little bit more time with kind of the same questions, but a different format. Maybe they write them instead of answering them verbally, depending on if they have some disability or a reason why they can't necessarily answer audibly in this particular situation. But again, you're considering specific needs or experiences when it comes in, because equality is more of a one-size-fits-all approach. It assumes everyone starts at the same level and it employs equal treatment, whereas equity adjusts the support based on individual needs. It recognizes systemic barriers, it aims to correct them, and it implores fair treatment. Quote that we like here is, fairness is not giving everyone the same thing. Fairness is giving everyone what they need to succeed, which I couldn't agree with more. Now, when we talk about equity in action or equity in action for hiring panels, we use equity as our guiding principle when reviewing candidates, especially those who live experiences may not align with traditional career paths. So let me ask you, are we removing barriers or reinforcing them? Are we evaluating candidates based on merit and potential, or just conformity? Those are things we have to ask ourselves when we're looking at equality versus equity, because we want to make sure that we're encouraging that diverse talent by removing those barriers. We want to ensure fair evaluation for skills and potential, and we want to lead to more, which leads to more inclusive workplaces and innovation. Now, here we have 3 classic boxes. We have equality, equity, and design. When you look at these classic image, you got 3 people at different heights trying to see over the fence. Equality gives them all the same size box. Equity gives each person the box they need to see over the fence, and fair isn't always equal, it's responsive. So in hiring, equity could look like offering additional processing time, language accommodations, or even accessibility formats, not to give someone an advantage, but to give them access to demonstrate their strengths. Again, you're not giving them an advantage, you're giving them access to demonstrate their offense. When you put it in that way, in that term, it's a powerful change of thought or mindset, and not saying, hey, I'm giving somebody a leg up or advantage. No, I'm just giving them an opportunity to access and demonstrate their strengths. And so when we look at equality, we already went over the definition. In terms of this particular image, the implication here is assuming a level playing field. It treats everyone the same regardless of need or circumstances. And in hiring, again, that's where all candidates receive the same questions, the same time limits, the same communication formats, no adaptations. In theory, it sounds fair, but it doesn't account for lived realities, disabilities, or systemic barriers. When we look at equality in this picture, we're looking at recognizing systemic disparities and adapts approaches to close those gaps. So in terms of hiring, that's when candidates are given access to accommodations or alternative methods of showcasing their skills. That might include language access, extended time, maybe some assistive tech, or trauma-informed practices. It also focuses in on removing barriers so all candidates can compete fairly, not identically. Now, the last one is something that we haven't talked about a lot of, but it applies when we want to have an inclusive hiring practices. So when we look at inclusive design, we're saying it's a proactive design strategy that builds accessibility, flexibility, and belonging into systems from the very start. So they work well for a wide range of people without needing to adapt as it goes. When the implication here is that it anticipates diversity and reduces the need for reactive accommodations. It's not just reactive to inequity, it's preemptive and co-created with those most impacted. When we look at the hiring aspect of it, we look at job applications, interview formats, and evaluation rubrics are built with diverse needs in mind. So that can include plain language, screen reader accessibility, culturally inclusive language, flexible options, et cetera, right? And instead of making one-off exceptions, the system itself is built to work inclusively. An example here would be offering all candidates the option of virtual or in-person interviews, maybe providing time buffers or using gender neutral language in all materials by default. So it's not adapting to that person's need. It's just saying, hey, for all candidates, this is what's available. That way, you don't have to identify necessarily whether that person has a disability, things that gets into the PII realm or things that may be unlawful to ask. But now you're giving them the ability to have a fair playing field and access to assess their strengths, regardless of whatever perceived deficiencies or disabilities or areas of need that they have. Now, with that said, we have to, closing this slide out, we have to remember that equity is how we operationalize inclusion. It's how we move from performative fairness to transformative justice in our hiring process. When we lead with equity, we don't just hire better, we build workplaces where people can truly thrive. Now, let's get into cultural competency a little bit. It's more than just awareness. It's the ability to understand, appreciate, and effectively engage with people from cultures or belief systems different from your own. This matters in regards to when interview panels lack cultural competency, they may misinterpret behaviors, communication styles, or expressions of professionalism that are simply culturally different, not deficient. This also, it matters because it helps us avoid fit being code for familiarity. Again, fit oftentimes is a mask for code for familiarity when we want to have cultural additions. So cultural competency opens the door to broader, richer talent pools, rather than just keeping in those familiarity or familiar terms of people that we hire and interact with. And some of the key elements of cultural competency is the awareness aspect, acknowledging that our own worldview is not universal and being aware of our cultural assumptions. And when it comes to knowledge, we're learning about their experiences, values, and communication styles of people from different backgrounds. And when it comes to skills, we're actively applying inclusive practices in interactions, interviews, and assessments. Now, some of the things we look for in examples of cultural competency in interviews, one of the potential issues we might have is not recognizing the candidate's international experience as valuable. Now, unconscious bias at play here is assuming only local experience is relevant. Now, the cultural competent alternative is to ask how their experiences apply to the role instead of dismissing them. Because that international experience, they might have a broader view of how you can continue to elevate a particular field subject or area that's been challenging for the team for some time or recently. And they may have a different viewpoint of how to, again, elevate that to the next level. You also have to look at misinterpreting. When one of the potential issues would be misinterpreting eye contact or body language, something Dr. Hall and I bring up ad nauseum during a lot of our trainings, because The unconscious bias at play here is some cultures avoid direct eye contact as a sign of respect. The cultural competent alternative here would be to focus on responses and qualifications rather than body language. Listen to the person. Don't just look at their body language and try to interpret it as they're being disrespectful or they're nervous or not confident. But it may just be a matter of, again, their culture, and listen intently and deeply about their responses and the qualifications that they bring to the table. And the last one that we have as this example is, as a potential issue, is making assumptions about communication style. Now, the unconscious bias play here is expecting all candidates to be extroverted or outspoken. What we have to look at for as a cultural competent alternative is use structured interview methods to fairly assess all communication styles. Again, looking at that structured interview allows people to be able to answer the same questions, to be able to grade accordingly, according to your rubric and evaluation criteria, so that you're not applying affinity bias, horns, or halo effect, none of that to anyone. You're doing it specifically based on their qualifications, their skills, and what they're bringing to the table. All right, next we'll tap into psychological safety a little bit. And what that means is that people feel safe to show up as themselves without fear of being judged, dismissed, or penalized. This really is essentially in inclusive hiring, where power dynamics can often silence or intimidate candidates, especially those from underrepresented or historically excluded groups. It matters because when candidates feel safe, they are less likely to bring their full selves into the conversation, or feel unsafe. They are unlikely to bring their full selves into the conversation. That means we're not actually seeing their best or evaluating them fairly. They're putting on the guise in order to try to fit within the framework that they think is wanted, as opposed to being themselves and really shining for what they can bring to the table in full, as opposed to partly. We must remember when we're doing this that we're not just evaluating talent, we're also setting the tone for how our organization treats people. So when we treat people fairly and equitably and allow them to be themselves in these interview processes, we're also letting them know that, hey, here, you're welcome. Now, when we're looking at the psychological safety during the interviews, we have to normalize these accommodations. We set clear expectations. We use structured interviews. We encourage authenticity, avoid judgmental reactions, and provide supportive feedback. In other words, we like to normalize these accommodations, be proactive in offering your options like breaks, clarifying questions, or different formats for responding. We set expectations up front, let candidates know the flow of the interview, who's in the room, and that it's okay to take a moment before answering. Again, that pause, reflection, making sure that they're comfortable giving and providing their best answer that's well thought out. You have to also mind when it looks at avoid judgmental reactions and things like that. You have to mind your own nonverbal cues, your tone, your posture, your facial expressions. They all send signals about whether it's safe to be authentic. And then we also have to avoid put downs or dismissive reactions in that regards too, because even subtle reactions like smirks or interpretations can undermine trust. So we have to be cognizant of that. And then for the accountability for the panel, we have to create psychological safety, because it's not just the job of the candidate, it's our collective responsibility. And each panelist should be mindful of how their questions, feedback, and demeanor either invite or inhibit authenticity. So when we look at these statistics and we see that diverse teams perform 35% better when they feel psychologically safe, we know that companies with high psychological safety experience 76% more employee engagement. Those are things that tells us how important and salient that this is in order for us to have in the foundations of our organization. So in a nutshell, when people feel safe, they shine. When they shine, we get to see the full brilliance of what they bring. That's the power of psychological safety, not just in hiring, but in building an inclusive organization from day one. All right, so now let's look at some inclusive language and microaggressions in hiring. In a nutshell, words matter. Microaggressions might be subtle, but their impact is lasting. Inclusive language doesn't just avoid harm, it builds trust. And trust is how we bring out the best in people. So when we look at the language, it shapes our perceptions and influences in decision making. We use inclusive language. When we use inclusive language, it creates a welcome environment for all candidates. When we avoid microaggression, it prevents unintentional bias and exclusion. So again, watch your words, they become your actions, basically, right? What are microaggressions? They are the subtle, often unintentional statements or behaviors that reinforce stereotypes or biases. Now, we're going to move to the next slide because I want to hear from you. I will read off the question and I will tell you why it's problematic. In the chat, I want a few answers about what you think a better response is. We'll get two answers or two inputs from everyone, and then we'll keep going to the next, which is the next part, which is the best practices for ensuring inclusive and bias-free interviews. Yeah. So the first question is, where are you from? Your name is unique. Why is this problematic? This assumes that the candidate is an outsider and can make them feel othered, quote unquote, othered. In the chat, let me know what is a better response to kind of asking this question. Again, remember, microaggressions are subtle and oftentimes unintentional. It doesn't mean the person that asked this question means harm, but it's a better way to put it so that way the candidate doesn't feel outside or feel like they're being attacked in any kind of way. Do I see some? Tell me about yourself. That's a good one. Tell me about yourself. You asked me to tell me about myself. I don't know what I might tell you. I might tell you about my name, meaning I might tell you about a bunch of stuff, but I like that. Just tell me about yourself. What else we got? One more. Somebody said I would avoid asking someone where they're from. You can ask them to talk about themselves, or you're unsure how to say their name, just ask. I like it. That is a beautiful and unique name. Can I ask where it's from? I like that too. Your name is beautiful, but I don't want to mispronounce it. How do you pronounce it? Absolutely. So one of the things that we came up with is tell me about your background and experience that led you to this field. Because in this interview, it might be really great to know their name and where it came from and the origins, but we're focused on the skills, the position at this point in time. I can get to know you a little later, you know. I mean, I want you to feel comfortable, but I want you to talk about more so what we came here for. And so that's setting the foundation across the board for everyone, regardless of their name, regardless of what. Tell me about your background and experience that led you to this field. All right, number two, we have this job requires a lot of energy. Are you up for it? The problem here is it may discriminate against candidates with disabilities, chronic illnesses, or older workers. So in the chat, let me get an answer about what do you think would be a better response or a more inclusive alternative here. And while y'all thinking of that, I like this answer from Leslie. I would not ask someone to explain their name in a group setting ever. But one-on-one, I would ask if there was more they'd like to share about themselves and anything special that makes them a good candidate. That is very fair. I like that. All right. Do I have any answers coming in for number two? No. All right, I'm going to keep pressing. Somebody said, what makes you enthusiastic about this job? This role involves managing multiple priorities. How do you approach that? That gives them the indication that this is a high demand job. So regardless of your condition, of disability, illness, older worker, whether you're a parent, any of that, I want to know how you handle multiple priorities. That's it. It's inclusive. It doesn't target you as a person. It's just asking, how do you handle that? All right, number 3, you don't look like a typical, whatever the job title is, senior policy advisor or whatever it is, right? What is problematic here? It reinforces stereotypes about who belongs in certain roles. Again, leadership roles, roles that have high commitment, that may require those multiple priorities, whatever it is. How is that? What is a better response for that? Don't even say it. Tell us about your background. How does your experience relate to this position? I love it. I wouldn't even ask that. Absolutely. Exactly. It's a crazy, but it happens, right? So what inspired you to pursue this career path? It's intricate. It allows that person to be able to express themselves, bring forth any kind of comments or insight into that position and how they're going to be a qualified candidate. That's just a simple and better response and inclusive alternative. All right, we're going to keep pressing real quick. We're looking for a strong culture fit. How do you fit in? Why is this problematic? It can reinforce hiring bias by favoring people similar to the existing team. All right. So what is an alternative response for that? He said, any of these questions will scare me away from an employer as a candidate. I would too. I'll run for the hills. I'll say, you know what? I got to go pick up something. I just forgot. I would show very little interest. Maybe I would just use it as practice and throw out some crazy stuff just to see how they react. I don't know, but it would deter me as well. What makes you excited about this role? I like it. These questions are wild. What's an example of how you influence workplace culture in the past? Absolutely. So what we put here is, how do you see yourself contributing to our team and company culture? Again, a culture may already be enacted, but how are you a cultural addition? Because just having to fit in, that means we're looking for somebody similar or that's specifically aligned with this. And we want you to bring yourself. And if yourself isn't necessarily, you can say what your culture is, but it's different between experiencing it when you're there. So how am I going to add to what you already have in your environment? All right, last one real quick, and then we're going to move. Do you have kids? This job can be demanding. Bottom line, it's inappropriate and could be discriminatory based on family status, right? And so with this one, we put, this role has flexible scheduling. What work environment helps you be most productive? I'm not asking you about your kids. I'm not asking you about anything of that nature, your marital status, your relationship status, any of that. We just know that this role has a flexible scheduling. What work environment helps you be most productive? Because I'm asking you in order to maybe accommodate, but at the same time, I just want to know, if you're flexible with what we need here. All right. Thank you for your participation in that exercise. Now we're going to move to some best practices for ensuring inclusive and bias-free interviews. These practices are your toolkit. Hopefully Aaron or someone else will send these out to you afterwards. So we're going to shoot through these real quick. Structure, diversity, skill focus, inclusive language, safety, data, they all work together in order to include that inclusive hiring practices. So use these as your check or as a check for yourself and your process, and always stay curious about how to grow. All right, first we have use structured interview formats. Structured interviews help ensure fairness. When we ask each candidate the same core questions aligned to job-related criteria, we reduce the influence of unconscious bias. This also makes it easier to compare candidates equitably. Think of it as creating a level playing field where every candidate is evaluated by the same lens, not by gut feeling or shifting expectations. Next, we have develop clear evaluation criteria and rubrics. When we don't define what success looks like, we leave too much room for personal preferences to creep in. So having a clear rubric shared by all panelists keeps evaluations consistent, transparent, and defensible. It also ensures we're hiring for skill and potential, not comfort and familiarity. Next, we have a best practice of preparing in advance and reflect on bias. Before we step into interviews, we should check ourselves. Take time to review the job description, reflect on your own potential biases, and commit to staying present. This mindful shift helps us become more intentional and equitable, not reactive or assumptive. And we also, next practice 4 is to offer and normalize accommodations. Inclusion means proactive access. That includes offering accommodations without waiting for someone to ask. Again, when we look at that inclusive design, that's what we're doing there, because many won't ask. So whether it's scheduling flexibility, assistive tech, or communication support, let every candidate know that their needs matter and that your panel is ready to support their full participation. Number 5, use inclusive and neutral language. Language shapes experience. Avoid gender terms, culturally loaded phrases, or assumptions about background. For instance, instead of asking if someone can handle a high pressure environment, ask how they manage competing priorities. It's a big difference. This opens space for diverse expressions of competence. Number 6, allow for processing time. Remember, not everyone thinks or speaks at the same speed. Building in silence after a question isn't awkward, it's respectful. It gives candidates time to reflect and offer thoughtful responses, especially those who are neurodivergent or multilingual. Let's honor different cognitive rhythms. Number 7, diversify the interview panel, as we talked about ad nauseum earlier. Representation matters. A diverse panel can bring different perspectives, challenge groupthink, and help candidates feel seen. It also signals that inclusion is not just talked about, it's practiced. Be intentional about who's in the room and how power is shared across that space. Number 8, evaluate individually before discussing collectively. To reduce conformity pressure, each panelist should complete their evaluations independently first. When we compare notes before sharing thoughts, we risk losing nuance or defaulting to dominant voices. So evaluating independently protects integrity and promotes authentic input. Then the last 2 I have for you, we have to be mindful of verbal and nonverbal cues. Candidates are reading the room just as much as we're reading them. Tone, posture, facial expressions, all of it sends a message. We are showing openness, curiosity, and respect, or are we conveying judgment, distraction, or just disinterest? Let's ensure our body language matches our EDIA commitment. And then lastly, debrief with the EDIA lens. After interviews, panels should discuss not just who performed well, but why they performed well. Where are decisions rooted in skill, alignment, or in comfort? Did we notice moments where bias might have crept in? Use the debrief to call each other in, not out, and to ensure the decision aligns with both merit and equity. Now comes the commitment. This isn't a one and done, it's a mindset. Reflect often, speak up when it counts, keep learning, because the people we hire shape the world we build. And lastly, let's remember our charge at MOT2 is to serve, enlighten, and excel. That's what we do when we hire with intention. That's what we do when we see people, not just for who they are, but for who they're becoming. Thank you, everyone. I'll pass over to Dr. Hall and Aaron for any closing comments. But I appreciate your time, attention, and focus. Be well, be blessed, and be limitless.
All right. Peace and blessings. I am going to keep this short and quick. This is phenomenal. I really love this training session. Brought so much to the forefront, being aware of ourselves, understanding that we're human and our brains are predictive models. There are a lot of things that we try to put in perspective of, feeling safe. But again, a lot of that's unconscious. So be open-minded, be respectful, be curious, be humble, be self-aware. The same way our culture affects and influences us, it has the same impact on others. Thank you, and I look forward to next time. Peace and love, everyone. Aaron?
Awesome. Thank you, Jawan and Dr. Hall. Just closing remarks. Just be on the lookout for a implicit bias toolkit that will be open to all staff. This is a recording as well, so to be in our cornerstone. So again, thank you all for all that you do and continuing to help build a Colorado for all. Everyone, take care. Peace.